The idea of doing a Lone Gunman spinoff had been suggested very early on.
I always thought it was perfectly cast. They all had that kind of great visual take on who they were.
We tell the stories others refuse to tell.
I'm Bruce Harwood, I play Byers.
I'm Dean Haglund, I play Langley.
I'm Tom Braidwood, I play Frohickey.
And we're the Lone Gunmen.
Actually, the Lone Gunmen were introduced onto the X-Files in the first season in an episode written by Glenn Morgan and James Wong called EBE.
We're talking about a dark network, a government within a government, controlling our every move.
I went in, I auditioned once, I got the part. I didn't think much of it. And then they just kept calling me back for one day here, one day there, playing these characters.
All right, what do you know about the Gulf War syndrome?
Agent Orange of the 90s.
Artillery shells coated with depleted uranium.
Jim Wong and Glenn Morgan, who created the characters of the Lone Gunman, had a little difficulty casting the character of Frohickey. They had already cast Bruce Harwood as Byers, and they'd cast Dean Haglund as Langley, but that third character was kind of elusive.
Hey, Frohickey, can I borrow those?
If I can have Scully's phone number.
Glenn Morgan and James Wong had written them to sort of become the kind of even more paranoid group than Agent Mulder. In fact, that's the way they were billed, as the paranoids.
These are unlikely heroes, not only in their characters, but in the actors we cast, and that's, for us, the fun of it.
They were funny. They ended up becoming, for the writers subsequent to that, a kind of comic relief. We'd always go to the Lone Gunman when we wanted strange and weird facts, information.
That is a Eurasian cluster fly. They infest vegetation like apples or cherries and can inflict a great deal of damage to crops.
Each episode that we got as the gunmen in those little early years were feeding the next one. So the information that we got from the first one would inform the character choices which we would make for each following episode.
The Lone Gunmen were very popular among the writers on the show, and we were always looking for ways to bring them back. Ironically, they almost were no more in season 4, because Glenn and Jim, who had returned to the show for a number of episodes in season 4, had written an episode called Musings of a Cigarette-Smoking Man. The end of that episode originally had Frohickey being killed by the cigarette-smoking man, shot in the head. We were all very upset, all of us who were on the show and going to stay on the show. We didn't want these characters to go. And so we made our case to Chris, and if you watch that episode again, the music actually sort of ramps up to the moment when Frohickey's about to die, and then it's almost like it goes back in reverse, like that moment was supposed to happen but didn't happen.
But not today.
We were all glad that they got a reprieve and lived another day. So at the beginning of season 5, we were without David and Gillian for a number of weeks because they were still filming the X-Files feature film.
Run.
And so we had to find ways to start the series so we could debut in time in the fall, but not have their characters. So Vince Gilligan, my colleague, came up with the idea of doing a Lone Gunman episode.
You want a cha-cha? Anytime, any place.
Both of you relax.
Shut up, you narc. It's your fault we're here.
The Lone Gunmen first appeared as cameo characters, and I always wanted to see more. We got our opportunity with an episode called Unusual Suspects. That was an episode that our 3 guys carried, and carried it admirably.
Welcome to the dark side.
Due to the success of that episode, we then did another episode, a comedic episode with the Lone Gunman called Three of a Kind, set in Las Vegas. And I think that episode was such a success and a pleasure to write and watch that it really was the spark for the idea of doing a Lone Gunman TV series.
Frank Spotnitz, Vince Gilligan, and John Shiven came to me and said, we'd like to do a spin-off of the X-Files starring the Lone Gunman, and it seemed like a perfect idea.
You want to know why Joey Ramone's my hero? Because people like you never managed to grind him down. They never stole his spirit. He never gave in, never gave up, and never sold out. Right till his last breath.
I'm not sure they got it until we actually pitched it, and we sat in the room with the Fox executives and pitched broad strokes of the pilot episode and the mystery of it.
Because the 3 leading men aren't classical leading men, aren't the types of guys who normally drive network television series, and we all had a hard time kind of picturing what it would be. When we finally did this episode, Three of a Kind, at the end of season 6 of The X-Files, it became clear to us what this show could be. It could be Mission Impossible with 3 geeks. And we knew from the pilot that we needed someone else for them to play off against, and someone else who was going to help redefine the world of the lone gunman as opposed to the world of the X-Files. And that became the character Zuleika Robinson played, Eva Del Harlow, which is an anagram for Lee Harvey Oswald. And we always looked at her as sort of a competitor who you would not know for the longest time whether she was good or bad, what side she was fighting on. All you knew is that she was thwarting the lone gunman's attempts to get their stories.
The first day that Zuleika and I met was the day that we were doing the episode when I was hanging on the wires and I end up upside down and she's dressed up as a guy and she kisses me. And she was so bashful about it all. She felt so badly that we didn't know one another and she had to kiss me while I was hanging upside down.
I was the ugliest man I think I've ever seen in my entire life. They put the short wig on. I was like, hey, okay, I don't look so bad with short hair. And they put the mustache on. I'm just like, oh, I'm so ugly. And I went outside and was, playing around and asking the women if they'd go out with me. And they were all just standing there going, because I was just so weird looking.
Are you sure that man with a beard was Eva Del Harlow?
Trust me, no guy kisses like that.
The shot where Frohike was dangling was actually kind of fun just because it was so comic. It was both a simple and a difficult shot.
Wire work is an art in itself. It's not, you just can't stick actors in them and say, okay, now fly around the room, look like you know what you're doing. There are artists who do that, and double actors. And so the fact that he was able to stay in character, survive a day in the harness, which makes your mid area really sore, and then perform acrobatics that are actually fun and entertaining, he dove into that role as though he was made for it.
Frohike, hang on tight.
What? We did have a stunt double, but poor Tom had to be hanging in that thing an awful lot, and I don't remember if he got out of it and threw up or not, but I know we were all being, just judging by the look on his face, we were all being really careful not to stand under him after 2 or 3 takes.
Shut it down! Hang on! Shut it down! Shut it down!
ABC Recycling was an actual car reclamation thing, and it was filthy, it was wet, it was cold, the mud was about this deep, and it was toxic mud because it was full of rust and gasoline and who knows what.
Come on, shut it down! Stop!
It was fun. The director really wanted me to do it. They had a stunt double. I said I would do it, but I would only do it once. That if it didn't work, I wasn't going to do it twice.
There was other safety concerns too, because there was metal in there. So what we had to do is we actually scraped out a square area about 6 to 8 feet square and about 9 inches deep, and cleared it off completely. And we put a base in there so that it couldn't be polluted by the other stuff. And then we filled it with a combination of peat moss and a special clay, and mixed it all up. So it was all very clean.
I just went for it. I just sort of figured out the timing on it, and we went back and we did it in the first take. And I did the face plant in the mud. And I guess they were happy with it, because that's what ended up getting cut into the picture.
This old friend, run and fall down face first, dig his face into the mud to make sure it's on there good, and then come up and then play as if it's not there. I can't say that I had to sort of cover my mouth laughing at the monitor, and applaud his commitment to doing it, and fearlessness also.
Byers, your flight's gonna make an unscheduled stop.
The corner of Liberty and Washington, Lower Manhattan.
The World Trade Center. They're going to crash the plane into the World Trade Center.
We were trying to imagine, crimes that weren't paranormal, that would involve serving terrorism, in this case, government-sponsored terrorism. And so we came up with the idea of running an airliner into the World Trade Center in Manhattan.
As a writer, and particularly on the X-Files, that's the kind of stuff you spend your day doing. You're supposed to imagine the unimaginable and the unthinkable. We want to set these characters up as heroes who are going to, unbeknownst to all of us, save the world. What would be a terrible, horrible thing that could happen, unfortunately, was the World Trade Center.
I have to say, at the time, if it ever occurred to me, I imagined, well, of course the government has already thought about things like this. Of course there are systems in place to, if we can imagine it, we're just, Hollywood writers. There are people in the Defense Department in Washington, D.C. who are charged with defending our country who think about these things, and that there are things in place to defend us against it. And I remember that Matt Beck, who did our visual effects, flew to New York and was in a helicopter buzzing around the World Trade Center to get all the shots that were used as plates to to cut in with a CGI plane.
In retrospect, it's it's a little bit painful to talk about, but I went there and we did a lot of flying around in the helicopter, and I kept doing pass after pass, flying at the building. We actually flew over it and quite close to it, and we got footage that was beautiful and in retrospect really poignant.
We got special permits at the time to go into New York City, to have a helicopter shoot at night heading towards the towers. I mean, it was, the difficulty in just mounting that and getting the authorization to do it. And here, months later.
And the morning of 9/11, I was directing an episode of The X-Files, and I woke up to see that on television, and my first thought was The Lone Gunman. And of course, my first thought was, God, I hope, because I didn't know yet what had happened or why, but I hope this has nothing to do with what we did on television 6 months ago. I hope we aren't somehow guilty of inspiring this, or, it became clear within hours that, of course, we had nothing to do with it. But it was a terrible, obviously very terrible feeling.
When you live in and work in a world that has so much imagination, and then when reality just comes and sort of slaps you in the face, it's scary.
I actually couldn't bring myself to even look at that episode again until I sat down to prepare for this interview today.
Oh, no way.
Jimmy?
I want to help.
After looking at the pilot, which we were pleased with, we realized we needed one other character, because the lone gunman, even though we had staked out separate positions for the three of them, they all basically know the same thing. They all work for the same newspaper. They all have the same beliefs about conspiracies and the same knowledge about computers. And they needed somebody they could talk to. They could explain this stuff to, because the audience doesn't know all these things, and it's not obvious to the audience. And so we came up with a character who would not only serve that function,
Stupid, stupid, stupid.
but also stand in relief to them, because he would be a really classically good-looking guy and could potentially serve as a love interest for Eva Del Harlow, which was unlikely for the three lone gunmen.
These boys are out here because it's difficult, because people say it can't be done. They have courage.
The Jimmy Bond character was the one that had the heart. He wasn't really smart, but he always saw the love and the heart and the emotional side that people had.
I knew that I was going to be in the other episodes. A lot of the crew, they just thought I was a guest star. So people were coming up and they're saying, "Okay, bye. It was great. What a great job. That's a funny character too. It'd be nice to see you again." And then I came back.
Monday Night Football better watch their butts. Love this game.
I didn't know what people's reaction were going to be to this character that I'd been working on, because it is a little bit absurd. And I thought, wow, okay, let's film this, and I hope everybody, likes it.
I will never tell you. You'll never find her.
I love the teaser for Eine Kleine Frohig, harkening back to the old Fox movie tone news. And I love the way our special effects team, led by Matt Beck, mixed old movie tone footage with this really high-tech computer animation, maps and stuff of Europe during the war that segues beautifully.
The child's father was this man.
You're thinking Frohig could pass himself off as the long-lost son?
And bring the poisoner of Alsace to justice.
Those of us who wrote for the show were geeks in the best sense of the word, in that a geek is someone who's very passionate about a very small area or minutia, whether it's computers or cars, and I was always a film geek in a lot of ways, and this was an opportunity for me to bring a lot of influences and play with them.
No thanks, Mom. I'm not hungry.
You have not eaten a thing since you got here. This is made special just for you.
I'd always been a big fan of the Ealing comedies of the late 40s and 50s, the British comedies, Alec Guinness, etc. And once we started doing the Lone Gunman series, it was something that I kept saying, I want to do the Lady Killers, I want to do the Lady Killers.
Have you got a girl in there?
Pardon me?
For a lot of reasons. One, it's an undercover story. It's an undercover mission. And there's so much tension in that, and from that tension, so much comic possibilities in my mind. Just the character Frohicke is such he's driven, He's a little bit of a curmudgeon, and the idea to put him in a situation where he has to be a fish out of water and maintain another identity, I just knew it would be fun.
But it was so much fun to do, and playing with Ruth Manning from New York, who played the old German Frau, she was just a delight. She was absolutely a fantastic person to work with.
Is that too hot for you?
It's fine. Could I get a little privacy here?
The idea was outrageous and foolish, and the whole idea of making me up to look like her son and all of that business. And the makeup girls had a lot of fun. The costume people had a lot of fun doing all the different costumes for me for it. It was a fun show. It was great.
Another one of the ideas we had from the get-go about the Lone Gunmen was that we could have a lot more fun and be a lot looser in the tone of the show than the X-Files ever could be. And so that meant using a lot more source music.
There was a music supervisor who found this most eclectic, bizarre, wonderful stuff.
We turned to a music supervisor named Barclay Griggs, who would come up with dozens of possibilities for us of songs to use for these pieces. And so we had a great time inserting this music.
And it was sort of an inspiration to me, because when I heard these pieces, it made me think, boy, and I knew that Chris Carter and company was going for this stuff. I knew I could really step out a bit, out on a limb and try all kinds of things.
Chris is enormously interested in music and listens to everything and is always listening to new music. So he really welcomed the chance to do a show where you could use a lot more contemporary and new music. And actually, in the episode that he wrote by himself, 3 Men in a Smoking Diaper, he specified what all the tracks would be. He knew exactly what he wanted and wrote for those tracks.
Sometimes Daddy feels ill-equipped to bond with Baby, and that's why we're here today. Gentlemen, keep those nipples high and proud!
Chris created the X-Files, and he created that feeling of gloom and despair that we love so much from the X-Files. And the thing to know about Chris is really a funny guy in real life, and that episode is that other side to him that you don't see that much. A lot of bodily function jokes and whatnot, and that's the other side to Chris Carter.
Melvin, you should be ashamed.
How are we supposed to get any work done? How are we supposed to publish our paper and root out graft, corruption, corporate greed for our loyal readers if we're changing poopy diapers? What if this is some kind of government-bred, super-intelligent chimp?
I'd heard whispers of this for years. The military wants a perfect undercover operative.
Imagine what spies they would be. Total access. No one would suspect them.
I had the idea for intelligent animals created by the CIA or the Department of Defense a long time before this, and I was thinking of a straight thriller.
No one would even know it was murder. It's brilliant.
Except for one small detail. You can create an intelligent animal, but you can't be assured of his politics.
I always say that you can tell chimps are smarter than actors, because the monkey would get it right on the first take and then he'd be bored, and he could never understand why he had to do it over again. So you'd see that, say, do this, and he'd do it, and he'd do it once, but no, we'd have to take it again for some reason, and then he'd start thinking of other things to do. And they'd have to work his trainers had to work really hard to get him back to do whatever it was he was supposed to be doing.
And when they were supposed to be typing on the computer, they would actually just use their strong fingers to pick off all the keys and eat them. So they basically just ate our really great laptops.
Working with chimpanzees is not easy. So we had a very hard time executing that show.
Remember, there's one shot where they wanted to film all the chimps. They're all sitting together drawing. So I said, let me sit down with the chimps. And it kind of reflects my character, very similar to the chimps. And I was drawing with crayons, and this chimpanzee reached over and he'd take the crayon from me. So I pick up another one, and he was like a little kid. Every color that I drew with, he wanted. He would take it away from me.
Chimpanzees, by nature, don't work well in cold weather. They're not cold weather animals. I mean, that episode focused mainly and was driven by these chimpanzees. Remember receiving a call saying the chimpanzees won't work, they won't come out.
There's one scene toward the end on the bridge when they're going to make the switch. The chimp is going to go back to his Air Force doctor. But it was, I hear, bitterly cold, and chimps do not like the cold. And yes, there were special accommodations made for the chimps.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's get ready checked.
Madam, I'm Adam is one of the craziest hours of TV ever, and I'm so glad we got to somehow get it past the censors.
I like right in the opening scene. There's a shot of Steven sitting on the toilet, so you know you're in for quality television when you you turn on your television and there's a man sitting on the toilet. I was like, well, it doesn't get any better than this.
The humor in that episode is so evil and nasty and just deliciously, bad taste.
I pitched this idea about a man being reprogrammed he's a bad guy. He's troubled, and is it right for society to change a person to make society safer, or do you let the misfits run wild? It was a takeoff on Clockwork Orange, sort of, somebody who was being reprogrammed. It became this very interesting thing about him arriving back at this house where he thinks he lives, and the original owner coming in right behind him, and it becomes a very funny situation.
What are you doing with your hand?
Tom Schnauz, who has a deliciously perverse sense of humor. And if we were worried about Frohicke's reaction to Eine kleine Frohicke, in which he had to wear lederhosen and be bathed by an old woman, we were especially worried about his reaction to Madam I'm Adam, where Stephen Tobolowsky, who is hilarious, keeps flashing to a midget wrestler whenever he sees Frohicke.
Tom Braidwood is truly a class act. He's a guy who put up with a lot of indignities, to say the least, during the making of the series, and we, God bless him for it, because some of those moments are absolutely the funniest moments in the series.
We actually shot quite a long sequence of a fight, of a wrestling match in a ring that they had to have for video, and I brought in a stunt guy we have who's was an ex-jockey. So he's the right size for this kind of thing, and he's pretty tough. And he went in there with this guy who's actually done some professional wrestling, and the guy didn't know how to pull a punch, and he was just hammering the living heck out of this poor stunt guy, right? I mean, we would do a shot, and then we'd talk about it a bit, and our stunt guy come back and he'd go, "This guy's killing me. He's really killing me." I'd go talk to the wrestler again, and they'd go back and he'd hammer the heck out of him again. He was just wailing on him and kicking him and jumping on him, and you couldn't get him to back away. It was the toughest day I think that stunt guy ever had.
My whole life is gone. There's strangers living in my house. Lois, my wife, I don't know where she is now. Neighbors, they don't know who I am anymore.
He's just a fantastic, funny actor, and he was just the best casting for the role. I mean, I couldn't imagine a better choice.
Proof of alien contact. Take a look at this. I found this in every crevice of my body, all over, everywhere.
I got a local hairstyling company who made us 2,000 gallons of blue gel. It had nothing else in it. It was just a blue gel, a clear blue gel, and we had to pump it in these big tanks. Well, we pumped it in on the weekend, and the director, Brian Spicer, came over on Saturday morning and said, I can't see anything. You got to change it. So we worked all weekend. We got this big, huge pumper truck, and we had to suck it all out, except one tank, and we filled it with blue water because he really wanted to be able to see the people in it. And what we didn't know is when you got like 200 gallons of this stuff, you couldn't see anything in the tank. So we just changed it all. The only time we used the actual gel was when we saw him climbing into it and going into the bottom, but the rest of it was just water.
I guess this looks bad.
We found a house that they were going to tear down that we could actually cut the front off of. So that house was about to be demolished, and the locations guy found it perfectly so that we could like just shear off the whole front and it comes down. We only had one take to do that, of course, as you can well imagine.
Did you let him see your face?
Here he comes. Whoa. What's he doing?
Diagnosis Jimmy, as in Diagnosis Murder. It didn't hurt that it was going to save us some money. It had some very clear James Bondian elements in the ski chase. We also were looking for a way to give Steve Sneddon more of a showcase episode, one that would really feature him.
He didn't see me. It must be something else.
I'll find out what.
We actually got to go up in Vancouver, up on the mountain, actually film for 2 days up in the snow, which is another challenge. I'd actually never shot in the snow before. It was fun.
Action. Any of that work for you?
They shot the skiing scenes up in Whistler, up north of Vancouver. I think that was one of those situations where we wrote Jimmy and Eve skiing before we ever asked the two actors, Zuleika or Stephen Snedden, whether or not they could ski.
The scene where I ski into the tree, of course, I just kind of ski a couple feet, and then they put in someone, and he skis, and there's a rope that yanks him back. I was blown away. I kept thinking he was gonna, if he just leaned forward too far, he'd hit himself in the nose.
Yeah, Jimmy had a ski accident and ended up in the hospital.
Gonna be all right?
Yeah, sure.
It's always a challenge when you have a character who's immobile, and I kept, again, going back to what inspires me, I kept watching Rear Window and thinking, how do you solve this problem? And a lot of it is what the character sees and reacts to, even though he can't move, and hears, and so we tried to build set pieces around what he sees on TV, his suspicions of the doctor, what he hears from the next bed with the old man who may or may not be the victim, etc.
The toughest part was actually that they put me in a real cast. So I would have to show up, put a cast on, and then they would saw the cast off and do the same thing the next day.
Say something. Testing. 1, 2, 3.
Testing. 1, 2, 3. This is Walter, freaking Skinner of the FBI, and I am going to prison big time.
The Lion Game was a fun one because we got to work with Mitch Pileggi, and it was so much fun to have him in that episode.
Mr. Skinner, would you please explain what is going on?
You three are interfering with an FBI sting operation. That's what's going on. You put an undercover operative in danger.
At 1013, we'd always been against crossovers. We resisted them throughout the run of Millennium. They'd been suggested numerous times, and we never did one. Only after Millennium ended did we bring over Lance Henriksen to the X-Files. But with Lone Gunman, our feelings were completely different. We thought crossovers would be fun because it's comedy. It's a completely different genre.
So, what's on for tonight? Who do we... What evil deeds are afoot?
It was so good to see Mitch get to be funny because Mitch in person is hilarious. He's absolutely not Assistant Director Skinner.
Aura, buddy, come on. Okay, that hurt.
He's playing me, playing him. The funniest thing was Mitch is such a nice guy, and he watched tapes of me and my performances.
Can I get anybody anything? Yeah. What the hey? I'll have a Cuba Libre.
Pretty cool, huh?
We had, of course, Mitch, who's a trooper, a really great guy to work with, and we lined him up and we shot him with and without a terrible mask. And then, in order to make the sequence work, we actually had to take footage of him performing and track it onto a computer-generated face, so that we had control over the surfaces, and that allowed him to actually deliver a line and then have his mouth pull off and deliver a line again.
Frohickey, the radar composite is in the CD. Get that CD.
I had this idea about them going undercover and something to do with dance, and I seem to remember pitching it being in a disco, and luckily Frank Spotnitz said tango.
The tango episode is one of my favorites because it gave Zuleika Robinson so much to do. I know she loved doing it, and because it got to deepen the romance between her and Jimmy Bond, the Steve Snedden character.
The tango is such a beautiful dance, and, for Eve's character to actually do something normal. I think for me, that was the best part about the whole show. The guy they cast to play opposite me was a fantastic dancer. He was a salsa dancer. He was John Vargas. It was very challenging because we really didn't have that much time at all to learn this dance.
Had to learn how to do an Elvis impersonation pretty quick. Then I had to learn how to tango dance 2 or 3 lessons. Luckily, I had a great partner, great people teaching, and out of necessity, you learn. But that frightened me because I'm not that much of a dancer, especially I'd never tango danced.
We had to spend hours learning to tango for, what was a 30-second opening bit or something like that. I am a terrible dancer, and I hated learning how to tango. The woman I danced with in the teaser was the woman who taught me, and she was really good. It was nice because all I had to do was stand up straight and do the basic moves, and she would dance around me.
In this crash course in learning how to dance, and of course once the guys learned that, well, really in the tango, the woman does all the work and you just stand there like an idiot and look good. Depending on how good she dances, that's how good you look in the end.
I don't want to brag, but that was me doing the splits. I have a bit of dance training in my background. Not that you can tell from that shot, but I did 4 years of modern dance and 3 years of ballet as a double major with my theater degree. So when they said, oh, just make up any sort of dancing you want, that is the result of thousands of dollars of tuition.
Así que, regresa el gran lobo, eh?
One of the funny ideas of that script was that Frohike was in fact this incredible tango dancer, and that he had this very hot Latin lover that he had abandoned, and that he had to go back and pick up the mantle again, which was just hilarious.
The idea that Frohike had this deep platonic relationship with this woman was kind of fun to work on. It was enjoyable.
¿Por qué regresaste?
Volver bailar.
Just thematically was just the perfect choice for an episode, because it's all about loneliness and isolation, and so many of these characters, Eve and the gunmen themselves, they're lonely characters. It's ultimately why the episode is so sad in the end, is Eve and Santavo's two lonely characters sort of make a connection, but Eve is doing it to get to another end, but she ultimately has romantic feelings for Santavos, and so that's what makes it really sad in the end when he takes a knife in the back for her.
Brian Spicer, who was our linchpin director, producer-director, who directed most of the Lone Gunman episodes. I mean, every time we do one of these things, he'd outdo himself. But that one in particular, the tango contest sequence at the end, I think he had like half a day to shoot.
And we only have 7 days of prep and 8 days of shoot. And the script was changing as we were going, and it was challenging, but I learned a lot about tango and dancing, and we were able to, again, utilize the camera movement, really make it sexy and really make it flow and make it a really unique piece.
I got choked up every time I watched the final dance with her and Steve Sneddon. I actually lost an argument about that, because originally it was scripted that he gets to dance with her at the end, and she's heartbroken about what's happened. And they dance, and it's a nice moment, and then he stumbles, ever the klutz. And I was insistent that we had to preserve that stumble, and they didn't want to shoot it. They really wanted to preserve the niceness of that moment, but they shot it for me, and I saw both of them, and I realized that they were right.
As Jimmy Bond, there was a lot of jealousy about Eve falling for someone else, and then the tragedy at the end. But it was a great episode, and I felt like we were really getting into our groove. We were really figuring out, what we wanted to do and how we wanted to continue the show and approach things.
Our strongest episode, in my opinion, is All About Eve, the one that should have ended the series.
See that it gets to Agent Mulder.
All About Eve was kind of, the beginning about All About Eve, and we never really got into it that much. We find out that she has a father, and he's this kind of ominous presence.
What about Romeo 61?
Someone who's been looking for me for quite some time now. Which means if we can't track down buyers Frohike and Langley ourselves,
they'll kill them.
It took a while for the character to find itself. At first, she was simply just a nemesis, and a very pretty nemesis, which was counterpoint to us, rough and tumble guys. But then she grew and became an interesting character.
Hey, I'm not the hardware guy.
Tell us everything.
that they made these little appliances, and it's basically just thin rubber around here with little nodes to attach the fishing line stuff with.
We're betting that you need us.
Oh, and why's that? Romeo 61.
You're scared of it, aren't you?
The Lone Gunmen were still growing when the show was canceled. They were becoming more and more defined.
I think we all felt like we found our groove and that the show was really working. The ratings were acceptable and good, and as good as X-Files in the early days.
We wanted to give the Lone Gunmen a big finish, and we knew that we'd sort of let down our fans by ending the Lone Gunmen series with a to be continued. And there was a tremendous battle royal with the studio about bringing the Lone Gunmen back at all. And then what we attempted to do was blend them into the fabric of the X-Files at that point, which was not easy.
It was the last season, it was the 9th season of X-Files. They wanted to finish everything off, and they wanted to close that loophole. So they did an episode called Jump the Shark, where they kind of tied up the loose threads of the Lone Gunmen series in an X-File sort of way. They brought back Morris Fletcher to kind of tie it all in, and Zuleika and Steven, and sort of wrote an end to the series.
The decision to kill them off was made because we didn't want to dishonor them with sort of a tepid ending. We knew it would be their last appearance in the series. We didn't know if there'd be any life for the X-Files beyond that season. And so we wanted to give them a really proper hero's exit. And so that's why we decided to kill them.
I felt like it would be the ultimate tribute to these unsung heroes, in that if these guys really are the guys who are saving the world, then and they're willing to sacrifice themselves for it, there's nothing more heroic than that.
Guys.
You know, I was actually quite thankful that we got an awesome death scene, because it was, you know, if we didn't, it would just be, oh, the gunmen walk off into the sunset with a stick and a hobo bag, you know. That would have been just kind of a lame send-off. So it was something heroic and phenomenal. But as you know, in science fiction, no one's ever dead. I mean, level 5 quarantine coffins are supposed to be fitted to the person. All the coffins are the same size. One of the gunmen is shorter than the others. Huh? Saying maybe our bodies aren't in those things.
With the purest of intentions, we wanted these guys to go out on a high note. We wanted them to be recognized as heroes. And that ending with them being buried in Arlington, you know, heroes, national heroes, was a high point, but very bittersweet as well.
I think it was the right thing to do. We did address tying up some loose ends in the final X-Files episode.
Why risk your lives?
Because I need to know the truth.
You already know the truth.
We've been very blessed, both with the X-Files and with Lone Gunmen, to have very loyal, smart, supportive fans. And the fans of Lone Gunmen have been particularly vocal and active and loved these characters and supported the show when it was on. And we're right there with them. You know, we would have loved to have brought it back, and still would if there was some way to do it.
When we started, it was like a day player
We were
thing.
day players, and what did we get? 9 years and a spin-off.
Yeah. We're the luckiest day players around.
Waiting for that next day player role.
We are a bit of a fairy tale come true.
Yeah.
Well,
Including the
And it's been fun.
prints and everything.
Yeah. It's been fun.
yeah, fun. That's the word.
So that's it.
Thank you.